Yeah, I was in Portugal, in my house in Portugal, and my sister and a couple of friends were going north of us.
85 years old, still performing, and selling out arenas. He is still the same face Britain has known since 1958. From the outside, it looks like triumph. Look closer, and the picture changes completely. A cancer diagnosis was kept secret for an entire year. The closest companion of 3 decades gone. A police investigation that nearly dismantled 67 years of reputation in a single afternoon. A man who told the BBC openly, without self-pity or deflection, that he knows he is nearing the end. Cliff Richard has survived things that would have finished most people. What he has said recently about the life those years have left him with is the part that stays with you. This is the full story. The raid that changed everything. Some moments divide a life into before and after. For Cliff Richard, that moment arrived on a Thursday morning in August of 2014. He was not at home when it happened. He was in Portugal, at his vineyard in the Algarve, completely unaware of what was unfolding outside his apartment in Sunningdale, Berkshire. The BBC cameras were already there when the police arrived. South Yorkshire police had been investigating an allegation of historical sexual assault. The alleged victim claimed the assault had taken place at a Billy Graham evangelism rally held at Bramall Lane in Sheffield in June of 1985. The alleged victim was a child under the age of 16 at the time. The allegation was serious, and the investigation was legitimate. What happened next was neither of those things. South Yorkshire police had contacted the BBC before the raid and shared information about the operation. The BBC had in turn positioned cameras outside Richard's Berkshire property in advance, ready to broadcast live footage of officers entering the building. Richard himself was not informed that his home was being searched until after it had already begun. He found out, in effect, the same way millions of television viewers found out. He was watching the news. The footage ran across the BBC's channels for hours. His name was attached to an active police investigation into child sexual assault. And his apartment building was shown on national television with officers moving in and out of it. The framing left no ambiguity about whose home it was and what was being searched for. Within hours, the story was everywhere. International outlets picked it up. Social media amplified it with the specific merciless speed that the platform enables. A man who had spent 67 years building one of the most recognized and respected careers in British entertainment was suddenly the subject of discussions that would have been unthinkable the day before. Richard denied the allegations immediately, and with complete clarity. He called them totally false. He stated his representatives expressed his deep shock at the manner in which the search had been carried out, specifically the involvement of the media in what should have been a confidential police procedure. The investigation ran for nearly 2 years. 2 years of his name carrying an association that no public denial could fully dislodge. The specific cruelty of an unresolved allegation is that it occupies a space that neither conviction nor acquittal can cleanly address. People who had never met him, never followed his career, who knew his name only from the news coverage of those months, formed different impressions. In June of 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that no charges would be brought against Cliff Richard. The evidence did not support a prosecution. He had never been arrested or charged. The case was closed. He was innocent, and had always been innocent. The legal system had confirmed it in the clearest terms available to it. The damage, however, was not undone by a press release. Richard took legal action against the BBC. The case went to the High Court and was heard in 2018. Mr. Justice Mann ruled comprehensively in Richard's favor, finding that the BBC had seriously invaded his privacy by broadcasting the footage of the police search and by naming him as a subject of investigation before any charge had been brought. The BBC was ordered to pay £2 million in damages. It was one of the most significant privacy rulings in recent British legal history, and established a precedent about the rights of individuals named in criminal investigations before any charge is made. Richard described the experience in terms that a legal victory could not fully resolve. He said the investigation had been utterly devastating. The manner in which his name had been put into the public domain had caused damage that simply receiving a favorable court outcome could not repair. He had lost 2 years of his life to a cloud that had never been earned. He also launched a campaign alongside broadcaster Paul Gambaccini, who had faced similar circumstances, calling for the law to be changed so that individuals under investigation, but not charged with sexual offenses, should have their anonymity protected. The campaign argued that the current system allowed reputational damage to be done to innocent people, with no mechanism for prevention and insufficient remedy after the fact. The campaign has had partial success in influencing public debate around the issue. The underlying legal framework has not been comprehensively reformed. What the 2 years of investigation did to Richard privately is something he has spoken about only in measured terms. He has described the sense of violation, the helplessness of watching something false about yourself spread across the country without any ability to stop it. He suffered the specific loneliness of facing something of that magnitude without a spouse, without children, without the immediate family infrastructure that most people lean on when the worst arrives. That last detail is the one that opens onto the larger story. The raid and the investigation were events that happened to him. The circumstances surrounding how he faced them reveal something more fundamental about the life he had built over 67 years. A life that had always been missing something that most people never have to think about until they need it. The man who never married and always said, "Why?" Every generation of journalists asked Cliff Richard the same question. Why did you never marry? He always had an answer. It was smooth and consistent, delivered with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it over 6 decades of interviews. His career required total commitment, and his faith demanded a level of integrity that a casual relationship could not support. His freedom to tour, to record, to give everything to his audience was incompatible with the responsibilities of a family. The answer was not a lie. Every part of it was true, though it was also not the complete picture. He was born Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940, in Lucknow, British India. His family relocated to England in 1948, when the partition of India dissolved the world they had known. They settled in Hertfordshire with very little. The young Harry Webb grew up understanding what it meant to rebuild something from nothing. Music arrived as his rescue. By 17, he was performing with a skiffle group. By 18, his name had been changed to Cliff Richard, a stage name assembled with a nod to Little Richard and Cliff Gallup, the guitarist from Gene Vincent's Blue Caps. Move It, released in September of 1958, became the first authentic British rock and roll record to reach the upper regions of the charts. He was still a teenager. The career that followed was not a slow build. It was an immediate, sustained phenomenon that never fully stopped across 7 consecutive decades. Through all of it, the personal life remained a carefully managed absence. The women came and went across the early years with enough visibility to satisfy public curiosity, without ever resolving into permanence. Delia Wicks, a dancer he dated seriously in the early 1960s. Una Stubbs, the actress who appeared alongside him in his television specials, and with whom he maintained a friendship long after any romantic chapter had closed. Jackie Irving, another dancer, to whom he was reportedly close for several years. The most discussed near miss was Olivia Newton-John. The two had known each other since the mid-1960s and maintained a close friendship across decades. There were periods when observers speculated that the relationship was more than platonic. Neither of them ever confirmed it publicly with any specificity. Richard later described Newton-John as one of the most important friendships of his life, which told you something real without telling you everything. By his 30s, the dating narrative had effectively ended. What replaced it was something less easily categorized. In the 1970s, Richard converted to Christianity. The conversion was genuine and total in a way that reshaped every subsequent decision of his life. It influenced his music, public statements, political positions, and his understanding of his own career as a kind of ministry as much as a commercial enterprise. It also provided a framework for explaining the bachelor life that was both sincere and conveniently comprehensive. He moved into his home in Weybridge, Surrey, with Bill Latham, a religious education teacher who became his charity and promotions manager, and Latham's mother. The arrangement lasted over 30 years. In 1982, Richard described them as his second family. Latham's girlfriend Jill also lived in the house for a period, which gave the domestic arrangement a texture that was more communal than coupled. The persistent question about his sexuality he addressed consistently and categorically. He was not gay. He said so in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 90s, and every decade since whenever the subject arose. More recently, he shifted slightly in his framing. Unlike before, he described himself as a sexual enigma. He said he would take certain personal details to the grave. According to him, his fans would not care either way, which was probably true. What he also said, in a quieter register, was something more revealing than any of the categorical denials. He said he did not like living alone, even now. That admission appeared in connection with his friendship with John Macklin, an American former Catholic priest, who became his property manager, and who Richard described as having become a companion over time. The word companion was deliberate. Not a partner or friend in the casual sense, companion. Someone whose presence in the house made the silence more bearable. Richard has never had a spouse to call at the end of a difficult day. No children to phone when the diagnosis arrives. No grandchildren to make the house loud at Christmas. The support structures that most people construct without thinking, through the ordinary accumulation of family life, were ones he chose not to build. The choice was real. The consequences of it were real too. In 2013, when asked directly whether he had regrets about not starting a family, he said his freedom had allowed him to give himself completely to his career. He believed he would have been a good father. Despite not having kids, he played a part in his sister's children's lives. The answer was generous and probably honest. It was also the answer of a man who had spent decades finding the most acceptable version of a truth that was more complicated underneath. The full weight of that complication became visible in 2022, when the person who had been the closest thing to a constant companion in his life was gone, the deaths that left him truly alone. There is a particular kind of grief that arrives in stages across the later decades of a long life, not the sudden, catastrophic loss of a young person, something slower, more cumulative, the gradual subtraction of the people who made the world feel navigable. Cliff Richard has been living inside that kind of grief for years. The people who knew him best, who had been present through the most defining chapters of everything he built, have been leaving one by one. Each departure takes something with them that no new relationship, no amount of professional success, no sold-out arena can fully replace. Cilla Black died on August 2nd, 2015. She was 72 years old. The cause was a stroke at her villa in Estepona, Spain, where she had been spending time alone. Her son found her. Richard and Black had been close for decades. The friendship was the kind that forms between two people who understand each other's specific existence in a way that outsiders cannot fully access. Both had risen from working-class origins to the highest levels of British entertainment in the same era. Both had survived the specific pressures of that trajectory with their reputations largely intact. They had lost spouses, though in different ways and at different times, and both had spent significant portions of their later lives without a permanent partner. They watched Wimbledon together from the Royal Box. They dined together in Marbella. They owned neighboring properties in Barbados, and spent time there in each other's company in ways that the tabloids occasionally interpreted as romantic, and that both of them consistently declined to confirm or deny, beyond genuine amusement at the speculation. What they were was simpler, and in some ways more important than romance. They were a company, reliable, long-standing, mutually understanding company, of the kind that takes decades to build and cannot be replaced with anything acquired later in life. When Black died, Richard lost one of the fixed points in his personal geography. 7 years later, the fixed point that had been there even longer was gone. Bill Latham died in 2022 at the age of 84. The relationship between Richard and Latham had been one of the most significant of Richard's life by almost any measure. Latham was not merely his professional manager, though he had served in that capacity for decades, handling Richard's charity commitments, his media schedule, and the organizational infrastructure of his public Christian faith. He was the person Richard had lived with for over 30 years, the man whose mother had shared their home, the person Richard had described as his second family in 1982, and whose presence in his daily life had been a constant through the most turbulent decades of his career. Latham had been the one, more than almost anyone else, who had shaped Richard's commitment to Christianity after his conversion in the mid-1960s. Their collaboration extended across the entirety of Richard's mature career. When Latham died, Richard paid tribute publicly with the kind of careful, specific language of someone marking a loss that is genuinely difficult to explain to people who were not inside it. He said Latham was one of the most important people who had ever been in his life. That phrase, delivered in the measured language of a man who chooses his words carefully in public, contained more weight than its plainness suggested. The accumulation matters. Cilla Black. Bill Latham. The close circle of people who had constituted Richard's version of family, assembled over decades from friendship and professional partnership, rather than blood or marriage, was significantly diminished by the early 2020s. He had other friendships. Gloria Hunniford, the broadcaster with whom he had maintained a warm connection for many years, remained a close presence. John Macklin, the former priest who managed his properties and whom Richard had called a companion rather than simply an employee, provided daily human contact. He was not without people. The specific texture of what was missing was something different from the absence of company. It was the absence of the people who remembered him before he was Sir Cliff Richard, who had known him in the specific, irreplaceable way that long history produces, and carried the accumulated shared memory of a life lived in proximity. Those people cannot be replaced by new friendships, however warm. They take their particular knowledge of you with them. The version of yourself that only they held is gone with them. Richard acknowledged the weight of this in October of 2025 during a BBC interview that stopped a lot of people. He said he was aware he was nearing the end. He was not trying to be morbid, but he was simply aware that there was not that much time left. The honesty of it was striking, not performed, or seeking sympathy. Just a man in his 85th year saying plainly what his situation looked like from where he was standing. It is the kind of statement that lands differently when you understand the specific losses that preceded it. When you know that the people most equipped to sit with him in that awareness were already gone. What arrived on top of all of it in early 2024 was something he chose to carry entirely alone for nearly a full year before telling anyone. The secret he kept for a year. In early 2024, Cliff Richard went for a routine medical examination. He was preparing for a major touring commitment, Australia, New Zealand, the kind of international schedule that requires insurance documentation. And insurance documentation for an 83-year-old man preparing to perform across the other side of the world requires a thorough medical assessment. He was not expecting bad news, and he had no symptoms. No family history that would have raised particular concern. He felt, by his own account, perfectly well. The results came back differently. Prostate cancer, early stage, localized, caught before any spread to the bones or surrounding tissue. The kind of diagnosis that, in a man without symptoms, without warning signs, arrives as a complete surprise. The medical team's assessment was cautiously encouraging. The cancer had been found at a stage where curative intent treatment was genuinely possible. There was no metastasis. The imaging confirmed the disease was contained. The prognosis for localized prostate cancer in an otherwise healthy individual is statistically strong, with survival rates above 95% at 5 years for cases caught at this stage. The treatment path chosen was targeted and conservative. Richard has kept the specific details of his treatment private, which is entirely his right. What he disclosed publicly was that it involved approximately a year of treatment and that it worked. He did not tell the public any of this while it was happening. He kept the diagnosis private for nearly 12 months. Throughout the Australia and New Zealand tour and the preparations for his Can't Stop Me Now concert series in 2025, he kept it private. During the public appearances, interviews, and the photographs at Wimbledon in the summer of 2025, no one knew a thing. He was in active cancer treatment for much of that period. Nobody outside his closest circle knew. Think about what that means for a man who had already said publicly that he did not like living alone. He had lost his closest daily companion 2 years earlier and was trying to survive the specific psychological weight of a cancer diagnosis, a year of treatment, and the ordinary daily anxiety of not knowing whether the treatment was working. He was doing all of that in the particular silence of someone who had decided to manage it privately. That decision was not avoidance. It was, in its way, characteristic. Cliff Richard has spent 67 years maintaining a specific separation between what he shares with the public and what he keeps. The cancer fitted into the category of things that belong to him until he chose otherwise. On December the 15th, 2025, he chose otherwise. He appeared on Good Morning Britain and told the country what had happened. He said he had been treated for prostate cancer over the preceding year. The disease was, in his exact phrasing, gone at the moment. That specific phrasing carried the weight of everything it acknowledged without stating directly. Gone at the moment is not the language of someone who has been given an unconditional all clear. It is the language of someone who understands that localized prostate cancer, even when successfully treated, carries a 10 to 20% chance of biochemical recurrence within 5 years. Someone who is attending follow-up appointments, having his PSA levels tested every 3 to 6 months, and undergoing annual imaging. Someone who knows the surveillance is ongoing because the vigilance is ongoing. Gone at the moment. Present tense, conditional. It says everything about where he actually stands. He did not spend long on the personal dimension of the disclosure. That was never going to be his focus. Almost immediately, he pivoted to advocacy. The United Kingdom does not have a national prostate cancer screening program. Unlike breast cancer, which has an established national mammography program, or bowel cancer, which has a fecal immunochemical test program, prostate cancer relies on symptom-driven diagnosis. Men with no symptoms, like Richard, are not systematically tested unless they proactively request a PSA blood test from their GP. Prostate Cancer UK estimates that 12,000 men die from prostate cancer in the United Kingdom annually. A significant proportion of those deaths are from cases diagnosed at stage 3 or stage 4, when the disease has spread and curative treatment is no longer possible. Early stage localized prostate cancer, the kind Richard had, is highly treatable. Late stage metastatic prostate cancer is not. Richard called the absence of a screening program completely absurd. He said the government needed to listen to the people on this issue. He expressed his intention to campaign alongside King Charles, who had undergone his own prostate treatment earlier in 2025, on a joint awareness initiative targeting men who might be reluctant to seek testing. The combination of two of the most recognizable figures in British public life speaking openly about prostate cancer survival carried the specific kind of cultural weight that health campaigns rarely achieve through conventional channels. He was 85 years old and had just disclosed a year of private cancer treatment to a national television audience. He had survived the disease, at least for now, the same way he had survived the police investigation, public accusations, and the loss of the people closest to him, by continuing, showing up, and doing the next thing. The question of what the next thing looks like at 85, for a man carrying everything this story has described, is the one that takes you to the final chapter. Who Cliff Richard is today, and what he has to say about it. The Can't Stop Me Now tour of 2025 sold out. That sentence deserves a moment of consideration before anything else is said about where Cliff Richard is today. He was 84 years old when that tour ran. He had been in active cancer treatment for much of the preceding year. The closest companion of his adult life had died 3 years earlier. He had faced a 2-year police investigation that had nearly dismantled everything his name meant in British culture. He still sold out the tour. That fact is either triumphant or heartbreaking, depending on how you look at it, possibly both simultaneously. The records keep accumulating with a momentum that has no parallel in British music history. He is the only artist to achieve a UK top 5 album in 8 consecutive decades. That record extended into 2026, with a consistency that has outlasted every trend, every generational shift in popular taste, every attempt by the industry to categorize him into a demographic and then move past that demographic. His back catalog generates steady royalty income. His live performances remain events in the old-fashioned sense of that word, occasions that his audience treats as appointments rather than casual options. His net worth is estimated between 90 million and 100 million pounds. He owns a vineyard in the Algarve region of Portugal called Adega do Cantor, the name translated as the Winery of the Singer, which has produced award-winning wines since the early 2000s and which represents something more than a financial investment. It is a place he has built and tended and returned to across decades, something that grows and improves with time which is not the worst metaphor for how he has always approached his own life. He divides his time between Barbados, Portugal, and the United Kingdom. The geography of his life is comfortable, mobile, and carefully arranged around the things that sustain him. In October of 2025, he sat down with the BBC for an interview that generated more genuine emotional response than almost anything else he had said publicly in years. He said he was aware he was nearing the end and said it plainly, without the protective cushioning that public figures usually deploy around admissions of mortality. Not the careful PR language of someone managing their image through a difficult period, or the deflection of someone who finds the subject too confronting to address directly. He looked at the interviewer and said that he knew there was not that much time left, and he was not trying to be morbid about it. The clarity was striking, and the absence of self-pity even more so. He has his Christian faith as the framework through which he processes that awareness, and it is worth taking seriously as a genuine resource rather than a public relations position. His faith has been the most consistent element of his life since his conversion in the mid-1960s. It has informed everything from his political statements to his personal choices to the specific way he has spoken about grief, mortality, and the losses of recent years. For someone who genuinely holds those beliefs, the awareness of approaching death carries a different quality than it does for someone without that framework. Whether you share the belief or not, the faith is real. It has functioned. It has held. What it has not resolved is the specific kind of aloneness that his life's architecture produces at 85. He has said he does not like living alone. He said it more than once in different contexts, and the repetition suggests it is not a casual observation, but a genuine and persistent truth about his experience. John Macklin, the former priest who manages his properties and whom Richard has called a companion, provides daily human presence. Gloria Hunniford remains a close friend whose company he values and seeks. The structure holds. It functions. It is not the same as what most people build across a lifetime. He has no one to phone at 2 a.m. when the fear arrives. No adult children who would remember him from before the fame and carry the version of him that exists outside the public narrative. There were no grandchildren in the house at Christmas, creating the specific noise, warmth, and chaos that domestic family life produces. Those absences are not catastrophic. Many people live without them. They are felt differently at 85 than they were at 60, or 40, or 25. The career that filled every available space for 7 decades cannot fill space the same way when the body has limits that the younger version of it did not. He has joked in recent interviews that he might be dead next year. He uses the joke the way he has always used performance, as a way of saying a true thing in a register that makes it bearable for the audience, and perhaps for himself. He is still making plans. 2026 calendar, ongoing tour discussions, the prostate cancer advocacy campaign. The vineyard is producing another vintage. A man who has not stopped moving in 67 years is not easily convinced to stop. The heartbreaking part of how Cliff Richard lives today is not the cancer diagnosis, or the police investigation, or the deaths of the people closest to him. Each of those is painful and real, and none of them is the final word. The heartbreaking part is something he has said himself, in plain language, without asking for sympathy. That he is aware of what is coming, and the people who would have sat beside him in that awareness are gone. That is the life he chose, and genuinely chose, for reasons that were always more complicated than the official explanation, which has brought him to this particular place, doing it largely alone. Cliff Richard has sold over 250 million records. He survived a public accusation that nearly destroyed everything and cancer. He has outlived the people who mattered most to him. At 85, he is still performing, breaking records, and showing up. The heartbreaking part is not what happened to him. It is what he said himself, quietly and without self-pity, about the specific kind of loneliness that a life built entirely on his own terms eventually produces. Some choices echo differently at 85 than they did at 25.